Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I'd like to discuss the Google PubSub connector, specifically a common problem, which is duplicate messages being sent in. So you end up with multiple Boomi processes running for the same message. And if you're sending it downstream, it can wind up with multiple duplicates in the endpoint. Obviously, this has some ill effects, is not usually what you want. So here's the ways that we can handle this. Most of the time when you get duplicate messages, they are almost always a resend by Google PubSub. And the most common reason for that is because the messages were not acknowledged within Google PubSub's acknowledgement deadline. This is set in the PubSub subscription settings. The example here has it set to 5 minutes. Sometimes it is much more restrictive than that. In particular, if you have something like 60 seconds or even 30 seconds or something like that, you can wind up in a situation where the Boomi process does not complete in that time. Google PubSub thinks that the message hasn't been handled, and it really likes to err on the side of making sure a message comes across at all costs. So they tend to be willing to send a lot of duplicates. So the first possible thing to consider is increasing that ACK deadline, making sure that Boomi has enough time to run through and complete and send the ACK in the time in question. Now, there's a lot of other contributing factors around this as well, and this is where there's some Boomi side things that we can set that will affect this. So obviously, the length of the Boomi process, that's going to be a big part of it, but in particular, the commit strategy, which is set in the PubSub operation, the Boomi operation for Google PubSub. So there's two options here. There's on process success and there is on process submission. On process success is the default and it's the most common one. This is the longer option. It takes longer to get to the ACK, but it's probably in most cases the one you're actually going to want to use. It acts when the process is complete. We figure you're done doing whatever you need to do with it. It's been processed. We send the acknowledge. And this is one case where if we use on process success, the complexity of the process, the speed of the process, these are all important. A smaller, tighter process with low latency is recommended. Now, one trick you can do is if you know you have a long process and there's no getting around having a long, complicated process, it's going to take a long time to finish, you can actually put another PubSub connector somewhere in the process and set the type to acknowledge, and it's going to send an acknowledge back. So that way you can get you send a thumbs up back to Google PubSub before the process is actually completed, and that can sometimes help it squeeze into your timeline. Now, the other option is on process submission. That means as soon as your process launches, it sends an ACK back immediately. This is a very fast turnaround, and very likely you're going to come in under the deadline, and that's definitely not going to end up with duplicates. The problem is, if the message is not processed correctly, if the process fails or something happens, those messages can be lost because you tell it everything's good before you actually even begin working on the message. So this can be a little bit dangerous. This has to be used with caution. You need to be certain that you can handle a situation where the process does not complete successfully, or if you're really, really sure that nothing can go wrong, and you probably shouldn't ever assume that because you never really know. So again, just use this very cautiously, even though this can circumvent the duplicate message issue. There are other concerns, possibly more serious concerns, to keep in mind with this option. There's a couple of other Google PubSub settings that can help. These are all outside of Boomi. These are more PubSub side things. So immediate resend versus exponential backoff. This is, does Google PubSub immediately send a duplicate when it feels it needs to, or does it wait before doing so? And sometimes that wait can be beneficial. Another option that has come up sometimes is using a dead letter queue. If Google PubSub resends messages to a queue instead of resending them to Boomi, then you don't wind up with immediate duplicates being processed through Boomi and sent to your endpoint. Instead, it goes to a queue, and you might be able to manually go in and handle them there instead of having it go create problems for you downstream. The delivery method is one possible option that you can have, which is there's at least once and exactly once. Defaults to at least once. So as we say here, this errs on the side of message delivery at all costs. It will resend, it will do whatever it can to make sure that message gets across. It can and will resend messages. Exactly once tells it to, as it says, send the message only one time. Now, that can come with some issues. You're going to want to look into it. Exactly once means it's not going to resend. So if there's situations where it does need to resend, that might not be the best option. There's pluses and minuses to both, but that's less of a Boomi application concern and more of a Google PubSub concern. All this is well documented by Google and is just some ideas of things you can look into that can help this issue. So that about wraps it up for today for the Boomi application standpoint and dealing with duplicate messages from Google PubSub, which, as stated, one of the more common problems with PubSub is duplicate messages. So thanks a lot, everybody, and we will catch you next time.